Well, hey there. Welcome to the New Adam podcast. This is a place for real conversations about how to build a meaningful life. We're not here to talk about theory or to hype anything. We just want to have honest conversations about formation and faith and pressure and purpose and what it means to follow Jesus in the middle of real responsibility. So normally I'm joined by Ryan Reeves. He and I do a lot of this together, but today he's leaving me to fly solo. And I'm really excited today that I've got a guest who's really a true legend, really, in the modern men's movement. R.T. Phillips served as the first president of Promise Keepers. He led the ministry during its explosive early years, where millions of men were brought into deeper commitments to Christ and to their marriage, to finding their purpose, to living out the 7 promises of a promise keeper. And beyond that historic role, RT has continued to lead and innovate in the men's discipleship movement through core ministries, helping men connect across generations and wrestle honestly with identity and faith in a changing culture. But more importantly to that, honestly, is that RT is a dear friend. His wisdom and his encouragement and his steady example of godliness have been a significant part of my life over the last few years. And I'm so grateful for him. And I'm also grateful that he has a great son, Tim, that has become a good friend too. And Tim and RT lead core ministries together. So RT, thank you so much for being with us today, for being on the New Adam podcast. I'm looking forward to hanging out for a little while.
Well, number one, I am honored that you asked me to join you. And for those that don't know, and I say this with genuine, straightforward truth, is that, Brett and I both have a lot of relationships with some of the really great, influential men's leaders at various levels in the country, both those that were huge in the past, those who are just killing it today. And I say this without reservation that, Brett, you as a person and what you are doing with Man in the Mirror is one of the most important initiations into the hearts of men and changing men in ways. Right now, there are about 40 guys around the country that are right now investing relationally in churches, not to include all the other things going on. So that being said, huge. I've loved getting to know you, and yeah, and my son gets to tag along.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, we have a blast together, don't we? These groups of guys, this group of guys that we're a part of, and I talked to Robbie earlier on the podcast, Robbie Engel, and he's in that group. And it's what I love most about that group is that it's just a bunch of guys hanging out. Like, if some of the guys there are doing significant things. I mean, everybody there is doing significant things, but some of those guys are doing significant public things. And it would be easy for them to walk in there and, feel some sort of way about how they're supposed to be treated and all that. But man, it is really just a bunch of guys who love each other and love hanging out together. And, we smoke cigars. I'm not apologetic about that at all. And we just hang out and we can talk about things in the context of this brotherhood of like-minded men that I don't know, I have very few places that I can be that honest and that raw and get like godly bro input, not like holy man input, but like brothers just saying like, you're an idiot or man, that's awesome. Or, some of the most profound things that have been said to me in that group. And I'll tell you, the other thing I love is that you and some other guys have built a prayer ministry around that group of men to pray for us. And I have been through some difficult times those group of intercessory prayers have spoken words of wisdom and encouragement to me that obviously showed some divine engagement. So I'm really thankful for that group, and I'm thankful for you, man.
Well, thank you. Well, on that prayer, I remember just as you were talking, the very first time that we officially gathered, a number of guys had known each other at various levels, but the first gathering was that miracle that you needed, and how we came around and prayed for that. Was it Korea or wherever that
Yeah.
trip
For the
was?
for the
And
trip to Asia, yeah.
yeah, the trip to Asia, and that was super cool.
That
How
was
that
super cool.
miracle, yeah, it was a taste of what can happen when, yeah, it was the way the Lord's going. Hey,
Yeah.
I'm in this.
Yeah, it's cool. Well, hey, so I mentioned the Promise Keeper stuff, but maybe like maybe a little bit about, well, like what shape before you got to Promise Keepers, like what shaped you as a man?
I came to know Jesus during the Jesus movement, and so that period of time where I was pretty typical was I was really lost. I was in quote unquote hippie culture, which tends to be glamorized, but it's really had a lot of darkness to it as far as the belief system, the practices. And I got drafted, um, and in the army is where, super lost, super, doing stupid stuff while in the army. Um, that my path was heading in a pretty self-destructive way for sure at 19, and then came to know Jesus through the ministry of navigators there in the army. And it just, the Lord in his graciousness did, just, people ask when, they'll ask, when did you feel called, quote unquote? Well, literally the moment I asked Jesus in my life, I just knew, Brett, the, the, that everything was pointing to that moment, and that I was going to give my life to whatever to the reality of his love and what he did at that moment. So that was a huge part of big brokenness, unfathered, deeply unvalidated man, which would show up. That's another story we may or may not get to. And then met my wife, and she was very similar background to me. And the early years, I learned that I was discipled by Campus Crusade out in Hawaii. I was in the military. She was at the University of Hawaii. There was a lot of great discipleship around just the foundational things around faith. And I went to Bible college, learned that I had a knack and a passion for bringing large numbers of people together. So I did a little bit of that while in college. And then when I went back to Hawaii to start a couple churches, we did some things that were God used in a really powerful way. That's part of that shaping in me of what can happen when you have a Christ-centered gathering. Even though I was pastoring, also a church, a Calvary Chapel background,
Yeah.
and so those were that kind of the early formative years
Yeah. So
of
what,
our
so I'm
life.
going to ask you a very mundane question, but like, what's it like living in Hawaii? Like I think people might think like romanticize it, or you like in
Yeah.
hula skirts
Well,
and surfing every day, or
well, it's a lot like living in Orlando, meaning I'm guessing a lot of the wonderful things that are true about Orlando you don't think about and all, but when somebody shows up,
sure.
right, and so you want to show somebody around, you go, oh, this is a great place.
Yeah.
Why? I mean, I would always love Hawaii. Started a ministry there. Had Tim. Tim was born there in Hawaii.
I did not know that.
It's yeah, yeah. And so it's it's wonderful. I mean, I love the tropic and the sense of that, but it's also has its own, like every other place on earth, unique battles that we face
Sure.
significantly. And so a number of the guys I was around and pastoring with had, God rescued us even out of that situation.
Yeah. I got to go to Hawaii early in my time at Man in the Mirror, and speak at work with one of the campuses of Wayne Cordero's churches out there, and
Oh yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
well, I'll never forget these two guys came from Hawaii to a Man in the Mirror training in Orlando. They came all the way to Orlando for a training, and the little guy was probably 6 feet tall and 300 pounds, and the big guy was like
You had local guys.
6'5", 350, yeah, and they brought their ukuleles with them, and
Awesome.
in our leadership training class that they came to at Man in the Mirror, they like brought their ukuleles the first day, and they're like, hey, I can't do a Hawaiian accent, but they had one. They're like, hey, could we do some ukulele worship before we get into the materials? And so they were there for 3 days, and
That's awesome.
every morning we had ukulele worship with these guys from Hawaii, and then they invited me to come and do some training in Hawaii. So I got to do all the stuff. Yeah, got to bring Kimberly, and we got to climb Diamond Head and go to the places that you go. Went to a luau. It was so much fun. They were
Yeah.
so warm.
Yeah.
So warm there, that the spirit of aloha, right? So, well,
Yeah, it's real.
so you're in Hawaii, you've got Tim's, and how tell us a little bit about your family.
Yeah, I have 3 children. So Tim, my oldest, and we work together, and he and Angie and our 2 grandchildren are both in college. Tim's kids are here. My second child was Christian, who was conceived in Hawaii. He would be born in Colorado. He and his wife and young son are in Chico, California, which is north of
Really?
Sacramento.
I've got family in Chico.
No way.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were just there last week.
Oh, wow.
And great time. And then our youngest is Kimberly. So you know that name. So Kimberly and her family are in Denver, that's where we raised our kids, and her and Riley and 2 grandkids there. So we have 5 grandkids.
That's cool. That's amazing. Yeah, my grandparents were missionaries in China, and eventually they ended up in Cohasset Stage, which is right outside of Chico. And my grandfather was a Christian Missionary Alliance pastor outside of Chico, and then his daughter, my aunt, settled in Chico, and then I've got a couple of cousins there, and yeah. So isn't that wild? It's a small world, isn't it?
Great town.
Yeah,
it's a great town.
Yeah.
Christian works at one of the biggest craft brewery, probably number 1 craft brewery. Cool. Is there, and he's a brewer there.
Nice. That's great. Well, when you think about like you're a dad, you've got this young family, like what do you feel like God used in your life early on to prepare you for your time, when you got as a pastor, and then as a Promise Keepers leader? Like what was it from your early life that you realized looking back on, oh, this was preparation?
Yeah. I think the number one thing for me is this gift that God gave. I think I know a little bit of how it happened. Back then, we were really everybody was into reading biographies of Christian leaders like Hudson Taylor, and was the faith guy in England doing the orphanages.
Whitfield.
What's that?
Whitfield, yeah. George Whitfield. Yeah.
Well, and so anyway, there was a lot of that was going on as a very, very young Christian, and of course reading scripture, and this idea that God just gifted me, that if you really want to grow in your faith, you're going to go through difficult times. And so somehow the Lord gave me a gift to understand that only through great challenging things, where ultimately there are gifts that out of that will be a greater understanding around the person of Jesus and what he wants to do in your life. So that was just a supernatural gift. Like I believe it's incredibly real to be angry with God, right? So there's the scriptures filled with that, to be open and honest with what you're feeling. So when I say what I'm going to say, I think it's an incredible part. I've just never been. It's never, not that I don't go through hurt and pain, and I've gone through enough of that. But so that was number 1. So number 1 was somehow the Lord gave me that. And then, you'd have to ask me more. What would be the formative things that really, really helped me? I was very driven And so, there was I was around really a lot of godly people.
Yeah.
And so Chuck Smith, so people would know names, some would know names if you saw the movie Jesus Revolution. So Chuck Smith was my pastor. That's how it kind of started ministry, was through his counsel. Um, I've just been around some incredible, God's gifted me to be around some incredible, life-changing, godly men over
Yeah.
the years. So being around mentors, being around people you look up to was super helpful and formative. And that would be probably some of the baseline kind of things
Did
that were helpful
did
for me.
yeah, did you have like formal mentors or semi-formal mentors, or is it just like guys that were around you, or how did that work?
Both.
Yeah.
My early discipleship as a new Christian was through a gentleman by the name of Craig Englert, who's in Maui and has a large church now there, or founded a large church there. So formal discipleship there. A little bit later, I went through a formal discipleship with a gentleman by the name of Ray Ortland, so in California. And so I went through that, but that was me later. Um, really influenced by and Chuck Smith, and that was more. Chuck loved Hawaii, so I had lots of one-on-one time with he and his wife. So
Are
I was
are
privileged with that.
RT, are you in the movie?
No. And then John Wimber had a huge impact on my life.
Okay.
But yeah, but I knew Greg. I knew Greg, Lori early on. That's how I got into catalytic ministry. Was I
Yeah.
called up Chuck once, and I said, Chuck, I think I love to do an outreach here in Hawaii. This is back in '78 or 19, well, early on, and and so I'd love to do an outreach here. Would you pray about it? And he said right away. I said, Randy, yeah, let's do it, but I want you to call Greg and Lori first. And so Greg had by then, I think, done a few things in California. So called Greg, and so Greg and Chuck came out, and we did something. At that time, was the second largest evangelistic crusade other than Billy Graham.
Wow.
So that, and you know where that's going with me, right? So God, where God would be preparing me from a catalytic perspective.
Right.
And so those were some influences within
Yeah.
me. So that part of stuff
So
was formative.
when PK comes around, then like you were involved from the very start. So you do this first conference, right, in Boulder.
Yeah.
Like, were you
Yeah.
guys scared that it was going to work, or?
Oh, yeah. How could you not be?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, yeah.
I mean,
What was that like? What was that like putting that first one on? I mean, because how many people showed up that first one?
4,200.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was hard. We worked hard. I mean, we had Bill McCartney, the coach, University of Colorado, was the founder. It was his idea. His pastor and I were very good friends. We remain friends all of our lives. He's now with Jesus, but he knew my background of doing large events that would be redefined by it, and so Bill had this idea of pulling together men. He said, I know a guy that can help us. I met with Bill, and then I did it as a volunteer. So that first event I just loved Bill and his heart. And I led that first event as basically a volunteer. And
Yeah.
that was the beginning of Promise Keepers.
So, the Promise Keepers movement, that, I mean, it sprung up, it made a huge impact on so many different men. What do you think it was like? What was it speaking to in men that made them respond so well to it?
That's a great question. In my mind, when I think of the ministry to all of us, men and women, but as obviously my world's men. So, what is the role or the ongoing activity of the Holy Spirit in our lives? And so, for me, it's out of Romans 8. It has to do with redemption, adoption, empowerment, and assurance. So I will get away from the into that at all. But I say that to say, um, those are so critical, those things that go together. Many
Yeah.
times we get the idea of salvation, but we don't get adoption, right? That's a
Yeah.
huge part of what you're about, what I'm about today. And what God did at Promise Keepers was, in my opinion, the supernatural movement was when guys showed up, and especially those first 4 or 5 years that exploded around the country, there was a supernatural sense of affirmation.
Mm.
So it made the really good worship
Like affirmation,
life life changing.
like affirmation of what though?
Father, of the love of the Father.
Okay.
You know when you have those moments, Brett, when what was the last time when you had this sense, or a key time in your life, where the grace of the Father, just His love for you,
Yeah.
was absolutely like you knew that you knew. It wasn't just
Yeah.
in your head, but you sensed, right? Okay, when you think about that moment, what the move of God, in my opinion, was a supernatural period of time where the Lord gave us favor and promise keepers when we gathered together, that there was an extra among thousands and thousands of men, starting with those 4,200, of a sense of wow, of His love, which made it easy to lead people to Jesus. So promise keepers, Franklin Graham said to me at one point that we had led more men to Jesus in this country than his father had.
Wow.
I don't know how true that is and all. So just from an evangelism, which wasn't the primary thing that we were doing, but why was that? Why did you
Yeah.
have an altar call where thousands of men would literally come forward? It was just this sense of love and acceptance.
Right. Well,
And so that's what I think, that's the difference.
yeah, the other thing that strikes me is you said say those four things again: redemption, adoption,
Empowerment,
empowerment, and
assurance.
assurance. So you think about those things: redemption, adoption, empowerment, and assurance. Like that speaks into men's lives. I think that they know that they need to be, they know they're sinners, like they know they're not perfect, they know they don't always do the right thing, and that there's consequence. I think men inherently, believer or not a believer, they inherently understand the idea that they don't measure up. There's some standard and they don't measure up to it, and they need to be saved from that. I think a lot of guys are walking around lonely and disconnected and depressed. And so adoption speaks directly into that. They, they're, to be accepted, to be loved is, I think, probably one of the deepest desires of every man's heart. And then to be able to be strengthened to live a powerful life. It's really, it's amazing. Like that's such a great way to put it. Cause I don't think, especially guys that that weren't raised in a Christian home, that aren't exposed to Christianity in a really positive way. And they look at Christianity as just a bunch of rules, or, quaint. Sometimes I think some people look at it as like, oh, those are quaint. That's quaint teachings from long ago that a lot of, Puritans or whatever, followed.
Yeah,
But to actually think about the way the gospel speaks to the deepest needs of a man's heart is pretty powerful. And I
love
hope if
that.
you're hearing this and you're like, man, I never thought of it that way, and that's what I need. Maybe that'll be the hump that you get over to go, oh, this is what Jesus is promising me. And that's hey, if you're hearing this, guys, that's the Spirit talking to you right now. It's not RT or Brett talking to you. So let me ask you this. We've been we're looking at what makes men tick, and all of us are. And what do you think maybe the differences are from like men in the 90s to men in the 2020s? Like what are some of the similarities, or what are some of the differences that you see?
Yeah, I think you've helped me with a little bit of that. I think your insight around, and it made sense to me when I heard you say this, that a lot of what the need of men was um, around already some sense of faith, some sense of the Bible, some sense of scripture. And the need was around adding to that, adding understanding. And so those things that we just talked about
Yeah.
would be an example of like, okay, here's what scripture really means. It's not about you need to prove yourself, it's about what he's already done and then living in a gratefulness. And so a lot of I think the focus was kind of was that, and I'd love for you to double down. You articulate that better than I can, but I think that was a lot of what the '90s and even in the 2000s. I think today there's no doubt it's more what I sense and I see and I know the need is around the depth of intimacy with Jesus
Yeah.
and intimacy with one another. And so it's a counter to the cultural Christianity. The '90s was a counter to the cultural Christianity around the need for discipleship. The counter today of what the Holy Spirit is doing is a counter around the isolation that exists around a depth of connection, of being loved for who we are, and what that looks like, and that common connection with one another. I think that would be
Yeah,
right. And
absolutely.
I'd love for you, and I know you're asking me questions. I'd love to, if you don't mind, unpack a little bit
Yeah.
more
No, I
of
think
what
you
that means.
I think you nailed it. I think, we talk about, Man in the Mirror started around the same time, late 80s, early 90s is when Pat was picking up steam here at Man in the Mirror. And he was absolutely speaking to that issue of cultural Christianity, and his message was, um, hey, if you really want to have the kind of life that you want to have, you need to get serious, and you call yourself a Christian, like you need to get serious about your faith, and not and Pat was great, not at perform. It's not about a performance, it is really about, what do you believe and who do you follow, and so it's the different side of the same coin now, but it is a different side. And that is, I definitely think if you look at the data, if you look at all the guys that we know that are trying to figure this out, isolation and loneliness are the things that are pulling people into despair right now, especially men. And then you add into that, I think some of the, we're in the I think we're post feminist. We're becoming post feminist, but the the taint of sort of radical feminism, ungodly feminism, um, and the way that it has changed our culture and made us so feelings based, and everybody gets their own truth, and all of that postmodern stuff mixed with the feminism, I think just leaves guys in a place where they're so isolated. And so what do? Well, they go buy an Xbox, and they put headphones on and they play video games, or they immerse themselves in pornography, or they immerse themselves in work, but they're just
Yeah, the hyper masculinity.
yeah, or
Yeah,
hyper
that
yeah.
you're seeing that as well.
Yeah, and I mean there are some guys that I like to listen to that may not necessarily be believers, but then the Jordan Petersons of the world. But then there's guys like Andrew Tate that are just wicked. I mean, it's just wickedness, and there's an appeal to it because it is hitting that,
Oh,
it is
big
healing that,
time.
it's hitting a feeling that you have. It's hitting but it's the absolute wrong answer. I mean, what we need, if this is what I like to say, if loneliness is the problem, then relationships are the solution. If isolation is the presenting symptom, then proximity, and the proximity is what we need. We need to be, I mean, we're face to face online, but we get together, like we hang out together a couple times a year with a group of guys and we do some missional stuff together, but mostly it's relational, mostly it's rallying around each other and speaking into each other's hearts, and reminding each other, like, of who we are and of what we have, and of you know of the fact that we are together in this amazing family of God. So it's fun. It's fun. Well, if you're a young guy what are some things that you should be doing as a young man that you think would lead to having a more meaningful life?
Um, can I start with the hope of what some older guys would do and then
Yeah.
circle back to the younger guys? Is that okay?
Yeah.
So I could just start off speaking from a big need that I see. What young guys, I think the first thing that's needed is to have some kind of genuine example of authenticity.
Mm,
I think the big need, and so maybe I'll say that from a young guy's perspective, um, if you can find a relationship where that you sense there just is just being real, that there's this the beauty of what happens because of what we talked about earlier of the things that Jesus has already done for us. And then out of that, then there's a guy that is not afraid to talk about his weakness, his brokenness, his failings, because he knows that ultimately there's a confidence because that's not ultimately what defines me,
right.
right? So because of that, if a guy that you can find a relationship with who's genuine, but he's not just stuck in a cathartic
Right.
how woe was me and all, but there's also a boldness
Yeah.
to know um, that it's not about me. It's, and so how can I, out of the heart of Jesus, of, serve you, love you, or a sense of that. If you can find a relationship like that, which I know is ultimately what you guys are about and what we're our passion, that's gold. And
Yeah.
so, man, I would almost, if I knew a guy like that and I had that early on, I mentioned early on as being discipled with a guy who was at that time head of crusade at the University of Hawaii and would later be a pastor, that he combined those two things. There was
Yeah.
just a realness about Craig, but there was also a fire in him
Yeah.
about the gospel and all. That was life changing
Yeah.
for me and a gift to me. So I
Yeah.
think looking for that, I just start there.
And I will say this also, like the flip side of that to me is there I talk to, we talk to a lot of guys that are mature, what I would call a mature Christian man, at least mature in years. But they when we say to them like, hey, there's young guys out there that would love to have a guy like you just walk alongside of them. I think the place they go to is, well, you don't like, I'm messed up. I'm I've been married 2 or 3 times, or I've got a child that I'm estranged from, or like I didn't save enough of my 401k or whatever, like I don't know any Bible verses. I'm not, and what I feel like is if those guys could really understand that every single one of their weaknesses is a benefit, if they'll couple that with honesty, that all of those weaknesses are just lessons that they can share and maybe save a younger guy from going through, because they can learn from their mistakes. But I think you're right. You've got to be willing to be authentic and share your scars a little bit, you know. And it's funny because
Yeah, I think.
I was just gonna say
No,
most
go
guys
ahead.
most
Go
guys
ahead.
will share their like, oh, I did a men's gathering at my house last summer, and one of the questions that I asked guys is like, do you have any scars? And I mean, dude, like guys were unbuckling their belts and dropping trow so they could show the scar on their hip from the hunting accident, or or whatever. But man, when it comes to like a scar that's from a hard relationship, or a mistake that they made at work, or whatever it was, man, they don't want to show those scars. And I wish guys were just as willing to show some of those scars, because young guys would just benefit so much from seeing that you don't get through life without scars ever. Like, no, there's one guy that made it to the end of his life, and then he got scars at the end, right? I mean, and those we all have these failures, and in our lives, and nobody's immune to it. And so we might as well just be honest about it and help each other learn.
I love that. I say all the time, there's a reason why the scriptures go out of its way to reveal the brokenness, failings, and sins of its best heroes.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a reason why.
Right.
Right. And so I think a good litmus test for a guy for those guys out there that are disqualifying themselves is what we haven't done. We as leaders have not done a good job. And what we would love to help you understand is how to process brokenness,
Yeah.
how to process weakness. And so to flip it, to see the realities is that is the most important time that for every guy that I know, every guy I've had an honest conversation with, that comes a time in life where everything that previously worked for them stops working.
Yeah.
And so you could look at David, you could look at Moses, you could look at Paul, you could look at Peter, you could look at all these men. There comes a time where the scripture clearly points out that everything that helped them stops.
Yeah.
And it was at that time where because what we don't in our identity, the first is, and you kind of said it, is first of all recognizing our brokenness, but not being shamed by it, but understanding then in that is the ability for when I was post Promise Keepers, I went into a free fall that lasted 20 years. Now I didn't walk away from Jesus. I didn't, quote unquote, commit the things that would be known as being disqualified. But man, I was slowly hit bottom.
Yeah.
And I was tortured increasingly every day around, on one hand, the need to prove myself, on the other hand, the shame over failed opportunities in my life. And so every day I was going, I was being torn between those two things until the gospel changed me, until I had a breakthrough 7-8 years ago, which had led to CORE, which led to working with Tim, which led to a relationship with you and others. It wasn't it wasn't my bio, right,
Yeah.
of all the great things, quote unquote, I did. It was really the story of coming to a place, and I have given, by the grace of Jesus, my life, that I don't want guys to have to go through 20 years.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't fix myself. And here's a guy that helped lead, it's going to sound arrogant, but one of the greatest platforms for men in the history of the country, if not the greatest, right, from a Catholic standpoint. So I was in the corner office, but eventually couldn't fix myself. I didn't know how to deal deeply with weakness and with those issues that came out of the wrong starting point, because things began with me as opposed to with him. So anyway, I'm going to get off
No, that's
the
good.
preaching side of things, but that back to those guys that we need, that you have given your life to want to raise up around this country, but you're finding so many guys are either don't have a passion to sacrifice the time and energy to come alongside and let you guys help Man Mirror to help them to whatever the reasons they're using, is that it can be one of the biggest breakthroughs for their life as they give to another. And yeah.